Imagine a world without travel, a world where we can't just step onto an airplane and find ourselves a few hours later in a different country, immersed in a different culture with the sounds, smells, and tastes that come with it. It's a world none of us probably imagined until this year when the coronavirus brought that luxury of travel to a grinding halt. But travel isn't just a luxury, something we take for granted. It's something we need. It not only moves our bodies literally to a new world, but transforms our minds, souls, and connects us with people in a way we can't from afar. But of course, the cost of travel comes with a heavy impact on the environment, and for years we've known we needed to fly less to lessen that impact. Well, still, it didn't slow us down until countries began closing borders. Airlines canceled flights, and cities locked down as coronavirus cases began spreading around the world. Now it's the reality we've faced for most of 2020, and a world we couldn't have imagined 1 year ago with significantly reduced travel has become our reality. While the environment thrived as humans around the world stayed home, many sectors of society were deeply impacted and industries forced to adapt. It meant millions of jobs have been lost around the world and a renaissance of sorts in the digital world as sectors ranging from arts and culture to finance and retail rushed to shift their businesses online. Well, now we can tour museums, listen to symphony orchestras, visit faraway places, all from our living room. Deals that usually came over business trips from New York to London or Istanbul to Doha are now being made virtually. We saw Amazon turn unbelievable profits in just 6 months, and Zoom replace business meetings, social gatherings, and family reunions. Almost no sector has been unaffected by massive and sudden disruptions to international travel. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll look at the impact of this disruption on a variety of sectors, with a particular focus on how technology is being used to make up for the lack of people-to-people contact, whether it has been effective, and how it might change the nature of how humanity conducts its affairs in the future. I'm Rachael Ruble. I'm a presenter for TRT World and the moderator for this panel discussion. And now I'd like to introduce you to our distinguished panelists. Joining me today are Julián Guerrero Orozco, Vice Minister of Trade, Industry, and Tourism of Colombia. Federico J. González, CEO of the Radisson Hotel Group. Tony Wheeler, co-founder of Lonely Planet. Bulut Bağcı, President of the World Tourism Forum Institute. Uppink, Calderwood, Head of Aviation, Travel, and Tourism Industries at World Economic Forum. Tom Lowry, Editor-in-Chief at Skift. And Tom Jenkins, CEO of the European Tourism Association. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Julián Guerrero Orozco, I would like to start with you as you're the Vice Minister of Trade, Industry, and Tourism of Colombia. I'm curious as to what sectors have been most severely impacted by the lack of international travel in Colombia, and which industries are better prepared to handle this new normal?
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody here sharing with you this very, very interesting discussion and panel. Well, I think that similar to what had happened in the world, one of the sectors that have been most grave by travel is in fact tourism. Tourism and everything that has to do with the hotel industry, with the hospitality, restaurants, with the traditional culture industry as well, commerce, fashion, and the automotive industry. But I would like to focus specifically on the travel and the tourism industry that has been greatly affected. As you know, the industry is a contributor to approximately 10% of world gross domestic global product, as well as 1 in 10 employments in the world. So the impact has been huge. As it is a service, it is labor intensive, and the impact has been very, very, very big. Now, as to which sectors are better prepared for confronting the situation, Well, I think that we have to remember the phrase of Charles Darwin when he said that it's not the big fish that eats the small fish, it's the one that is able to adapt that it will be the winner. I think that the industries that are most flexible and are able to adapt, this is not the moment to remain still or to hibernate, to wait until the pandemic passes, because actually the pandemic will be the new normal. So I think that the industries that are better able to adapt, to change, to reimagine what they can do. And we have examples in Colombia of companies in the tourism industry where they have adapted and changed their type of products. So that those that have a greater flexibility to attend to the customer's needs, I think those are the ones that will be coming like in a really good situation in the future.
Adaptation really has been the key in the year 2020. I want to open the discussion up now to Federico González, CEO of the Radisson Hotel Group. What impact have we seen on hotels and tourism in the wake of the pandemic?
Well, I think obviously, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. I think obviously the impact has been very, very strong across the world and across all the segments, I think, in the industry. I think from a geography point of view, what we have seen is after the first and initial effect that, for example, China had, and we have seen that across all of our hotels. But actually, China 1 year after is nearly back to where it was 1 year ago. So I think we have seen a very significant effect during the first months, as we have seen across the world. But actually, the recovery also has been extremely quick. And I think when we look across China today, most of the towns and most of the markets are back to where they were before COVID. I think when you look to the US, for example, the effect has been slightly worse than it was in China. But actually, we have seen some segments like the mid-scale service apartments, and we have seen suburban. Not the big urban hotels, but all of those who are outside of the big towns. In many of them that are more reachable by car versus plane, they have had actually a better performance than the big tourist destinations. I think across Europe and Middle East and Africa, we have seen a severe effect, even deeper than the one we have seen in the US. And I think that has been driven by the complexity of international travel. Across all the countries, we have seen, obviously, a significant drop across all the segments. But I think also we have seen that the sectors that have done best have been those that are reachable by car. So many consumers, many business travelers and tourism have replaced plane or international travel by more local travel and travel that you can do by car. And I think also has been different by periods. We saw obviously a Q2, April to June, that was really significantly bad. We saw a slight recovery during July, September, I think, across the world, and actually driven by local holidays or local destinations. We had hotels, for example, in the south of France or hotels in Norway, summer destinations that were at nearly peak, and also in countries like Russia or in Turkey, where we saw hotels at very high level of occupancy. And I think after that, October, December came back to another kind of second wave shock, where we have seen also the negative effects. So I think across all segments, possibly suburban, mid-scale service apartments have done better. And I think when we look to the coming months, we see all will depend on when the vaccination is available everywhere. But I think, to what was said before, I think the wish and the willingness to travel is still there. I think following the metaphor of the fish that was said before by the Minister of Colombia, the fish only realizes that they need oxygen when they are out of the water. And I think this is the kind of travel. We have only realized of how much we really care and need to travel and meet people when suddenly we realize that we cannot do it.
Yeah, I think you're certainly right that the wish and will to travel is still there. I want to talk a little bit later on, too, about the vaccine, which, of course, is going to be probably a key part of that. I'd like you to ask my next question of Tony Wheeler, the co-founder of Lonely Planet. Since some travel restrictions were relaxed around the world in June, how has the global tourism industry adapted to this new normal that was brought on by the pandemic? And how is the industry preparing for a future that may be radically different?
I think this future is going to be radically different, but I think the thing is that there isn't a new normal. I just last week I went around various friends and said, "Well, how has this hit you? How have you been affected by it?" I'm living in Australia where we have extremely low virus cases. In the state of Victoria, where I am, we have not had a single case for over a month. There's been 33 days now where we have not had one single case of coronavirus. But nevertheless, we cannot leave the country. We cannot travel from state to state. There are all sorts of restrictions on our approach to travel. I contacted a friend of mine in Hong Kong a few days ago, and he said, "Well, I've been various places in the world in this past 6-9 months. The only problem has been every time I return to Hong Kong, I have to go into isolation for 14 days. I've had 42 days of isolation, which is not what travel used to be about." I contacted a friend of mine in Tonga in the Pacific, where they have not had a single case. There is nobody at all in Tonga who has had coronavirus, but he said, "We haven't had a flight in for 6 months." And they're saying the first flights into Tonga are going to be in June or July next year. And I just think that we're not really going to find what the story is behind this for 12 months, 24 months. We really don't know who has had the right approach, whether the Sweden solution of just, stepping back and telling people to behave themselves has worked, or the US solution of do nothing and hope that things work out. We just do not know. And it's going to take a long time before we really find out what the answers are. But I think one thing is that we're not going to go back to the way travel was before. The idea that we can just jump on the plane and head off to somewhere else and not worry about it. There's been so much said about how we've been concerned about climate change and the effect of travel. And everyone has said, "But you can't change it. That's the way it is." And suddenly we found we can change it. We can shut everything down and suddenly start a new world. And I think that is going to be the real situation of what is the world going to be like when we come back. And it isn't going to be the world that was there earlier this year.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that as well just a little bit later. But first, I want to bring in Bulut Bağcı, president of the World Tourism Forum Institute. Do you think that international tourism, as we know it, can survive the pandemic? And what is the sense among industry stakeholders of the possibility of a return to a pre-pandemic normal, or maybe not so much normal, but close to what we used to know with regards to travel and tourism?
So thank you very much. First of all, I want to say, when you are starting the program, you said tourism is the must or luxury. First of all, I can say this, tourism is a must. This 100% sure. So if we turn back to pandemic, what we can emphasize, when this pandemic started in March, the first week of the March, globally, so all the countries closed their borders and they stopped to host the tourists from other countries. So what we see during the process in June and July, so they opened the borders. So my call to the presidents and the head of states and the ministries online now with us. So my call to them, first of all, we have to be sure. We have to be careful when we are closing the borders, because closing is easy, but it's too hard to open it back. So this is the first thing that I can emphasize. And the second thing is, especially in 2021, yesterday we announced a report, and the total cost of the coronavirus is $3 trillion to the worldwide. And our expectation for 2021 is this number to reduce. I mean, again, 2021, the industry will suffer, but it will be like $1 trillion. But our expectation in 2022, all the industry is going to recover with the jump of 25% if we compare the numbers with 2019 before the pandemic. So this is our forecasts for the industry. And the most important thing on this, to catch these numbers, to be minimum, I mean, they get the harm of this coronavirus on travel business. The most important thing is the governments have to get a huge attention when they are closing the borders to another country. So closing the borders it's easy to take the decision, but it's too hard to get it back. Thank you.
I want to bring in Lauren Uppink, Calderwood, head of aviation, travel, and tourism industries at the World Economic Forum. I'm curious as to where things stand now for the aviation industry, because, of course, as we know, as the world went into lockdown in the spring and international flights came to a standstill, the aviation industry was hit particularly hard, but it already was struggling even before the pandemic.
The aviation industry was actually experiencing extreme growth, and we were expecting international arrivals to meet 1.8 billion by 2030. The original forecast was 1.4 billion for 2020, and we met that in 2018. So we've only been seeing growth in terms of numbers and people moving across the world. And with that is access to the benefits that aviation delivers, and that's in terms of jobs created through travel and tourism, but also indirect economic development that is a result of travel and tourism. Of course, it was receiving a lot of slack for flight shaming and its carbon footprint. But in comparison to many other sectors, it's actually got a small carbon footprint. But it is a very visible industry, and that is no excuse for why it should not be addressing its carbon footprint. And one thing that this pandemic has served to do is actually accelerate efforts of the industry across the value chain to make changes around carbon intensity, adoption of sustainable aviation fuels. And we've actually had renewed interest and energy from our stakeholders to do that. I think important to note, though, is that many of the operators have been, flying on fleets of 10%, if that, and restarting again will require an enormous amount of certification, of safety accreditation. And what's great is that stakeholders across the sector, from the international regulator to governments, member states, to carriers, to airports, are all working very closely together on the takeoff guidelines. They're working very closely in collaboration with the World Health Organization and chief medical officers across the globe to make sure that as we open travel again, and open borders, which absolutely agreed is necessary for economic development across the globe, that as we do that, it's done in a way that is not a risk to public health. And, responding to Tony, I think no one has an exact solution yet on what that looks like, but we really believe that governments in particular need to move from risk avoidance to risk mitigation. There is no zero risk, and there are ways that you can reduce the risk to a level that is comfortable and protects the public health of citizens.
Tom Lowry, editor-in-chief at Skift. We saw Zoom kind of take over business meetings this year, not just business meetings, but social gatherings and family reunions, as I mentioned in my intro. But I'm curious as to some of the stories that you've come across as editor-in-chief at Skift that have struck you about how the travel industry, and in particular business travel, has been impacted by the pandemic, and some ways that innovation has changed that, not just temporarily, but probably long term.
Well, let me start by making kind of a strange observation. And I think that one of the sectors that's been hardest hit is corporate travel. And I say that because of the ripple effects that the sort of standstill in corporate travel have had on airlines, on hotels, on the hotel business. At the same time, I think one of the most resilient sectors has been corporate travel, just because of the technology. As we're seeing today and at this conference, we're able to talk to each other, and we're seeing a lot of companies adapt virtual platforms to be able to do business. But every time that we do a corporate travel story that says it's never going to be the same, there's always a ton of pushback on social media from folks saying that you have to be there in person to do business. So it's a really vibrant argument, and one that we want to cover more fully in terms of, how important is it to be there in person. Again, some of the platforms have made the fact that you don't need to get on an airplane and be in a meeting in person, I think will stay with us. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a hybrid model with corporate business going forward.
Tom Jenkins, CEO of the European Tourism Association. What has been the biggest impact on tourism in Europe? Is it the virus itself, or do you think it's the fear that surrounds it and the measures that have been put in place to contain it?
The second, the virus itself has obviously had a tragic impact on those people who it's affected, but it's still affected a very small proportion of the population. The measures which have been put in place have been devastating. We've seen a 95% drop in business in the European incoming industry, which I largely represent. The one issue I would actually quietly take with some of the previous speakers is that I think the current situation is genuinely abnormal. I think what we're looking at is a situation which is created partly by the virus and partly by government's response to the virus. And I think this will pass. I think we're with a vaccine, which I know we're going to talk about in a second, we will see a post-COVID situation. And a post-COVID situation will be what it says on the tin. COVID will be a thing of the past. And I think if you've adapted to what people are calling the new normal, which is the situation at present, you've adapted to the wrong environment. We will be looking at something which will not be identical to the situation we had before, but it would not be radically different. And it won't be radically different because people's motivation to travel, the things that they want to see, the desire for personal experience will not change. And if people's motivation won't change, and I'm pretty sure it won't, I don't think we're going to see a radically different environment for leisure tourism in the middle distance.
Lauren Uppink, Calderwood, I want to bring it back to you. You talked about the global growth in travel before the pandemic hit, and obviously that is something people are looking to get back to, is traveling. But is it conceivable that airlines can simply return to their previous levels of service once this pandemic has passed?
Take a staged approach. You have, on one end of the spectrum, aircraft that have been kept in action, and others that have been parked in the desert. You've seen the photographs of hangars and deserts where planes are kept and are being held off. And we've seen also the retirement of a number of aircraft. So not only will they need to, get these aircraft ready for flying, but they'll need to make sure that crew and ground staff, etc., are all recertified and ready to return. I thought it might be useful to respond to Tom on the new normal. I think you're right that there is pent-up demand for travel. We may not see that same level of mass tourism until, say, 2024 if we're conservative. But I think where there's a new normal is from an industry perspective, there is need to be prepared. There's need for preparedness and risk mitigation for future crises. And I think that's going to change the way that they do business. And I think that may offer up to tourism's more appropriate and better ways to travel.
Tom Lowry, you talked about how business travel is forever changed, but it could be rebound more quickly. How has the COVID-19 crisis impacted the speed and direction of technological innovation?
I don't know how many stories I've edited where somebody is quoted as saying, we've done in 4 months what probably would have taken 10 years. So I've edited that story over and over again. Contactless technology. Things that people were imagining a decade from now are being implemented at airports and in hotels. So, the speed to delivery has been phenomenal in terms of that. I mean, we did a story last week about a museum in Baltimore that is using the virtual platform Second Life with avatars that would have been just unthinkable a year ago. And the museum is saying that Second Life has helped save our business. So it's incredible that there's this sort of I don't know what you would call it, a silver lining to the pandemic in terms of technological advancements.
Julián, Orozco, with every crisis, as we know, comes opportunity. Which sectors have risen up to fill needs created by the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns that came with that?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question right. I'm sorry.
Sure. I was wondering about sectors that have filled the need that was created by this pandemic and the lockdowns. Which sectors in particular have thrived this year?
Well, I think that the sectors that have thrived were the ones that were able to make use of the world and tools and internet and e-commerce to develop their activities. I think those are the ones that are thriving. Of course, there are ones that are more easily positioned to do that, like consulting or finance or other sectors. But there are others that the situation is much more challenging, such as tourism, for example. But of course, I think that those that have been in a very digital focus are the ones that are better positioned. Now, when it comes to tourism, I think that there are many tools that companies are making use of to make sure that they can be better positioned in the recovery stage. And I mean tools such as market analysis. We are moving from the forecast to the nowcast to be able to have information in real time and make good analysis to make sure that we are focusing rightly on the markets. In that regard, Colombia has developed, for example, what we call the Tourism Visor, a tool for statistics and for analysis online, available for local governments, but also for the private sector. Everything that has to do with the biosafety measures and the use of technology as well. Lowry knows it well because the World Economic Forum has had an initiative called the Common Pass to facilitate international travel worldwide. Also, the marketing strategies have to be digitalized in a more extensive way to make sure that we make use of this tool and to make sure that we invest every single penny in the promotion strategy for destinations in a good way. Also, when it comes to booking, there has to be more flexibility. People are starting to book in a shorter period of time before they actually travel. There has to be flex in changing itineraries and cancellations, etc. And we need also those companies that are working better connected between suppliers and companies are also going to be, I think, the winners when it comes to this. Let me finalize, and I think that this is the pandemic is also a huge opportunity, to rethink. I don't like to talk about recovery, but because that would be to think about being in the same situation as we were in January or February of this year. I think that there's opportunity more than recovery to reactivation, to reimagine the sector, the tourism and travel sector, and to aim at having a better type of tourism than the one that we had before. And of course, the issue of sustainability becomes a very, very central point in this effort to reactivate.
Bulut, Bağcı, I'm curious as to your thoughts on this year of the pandemic, and have there been any countries in particular or industry sectors that you have seen that have really stood out in regards to their management of this pandemic and their use of innovation?
So actually, what I see and I observe, specifically Germany, Turkey, and the South Korea has managed this pandemic very well on also tourism business, because as I see some of the countries in the world, so they did not close the hotels, and first of all they start to write the how they can manage and operate the system. So because it's easy to close, but the thing is, it's too hard to operate the system again. So what we see, first of all, some countries are started to write the manuals. I mean, the hotel manuals, aviation manuals, airport manuals. After then, as we see, Europe and the other countries are follow that. So it's a huge step during the pandemic that have to be done. Now we can see this. I mean, the manuals and the protocols in all around the world. So, and also the WTCC announced some protocols, and the governments are following that, and the World Economic Forum also. So it's good, because when this pandemic started, nobody knows what they will do in the tourism business. But now, even one hotel, I mean, the gentleman is working in the restaurant, knows that what is the protocol and how they can apply. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is, I want to contribute to the excellency. All crises create an opportunity. After this pandemic, what we are observing and what we are seeing, that especially the boutique hotels in the worldwide, and the protocols is created that the hotels are following, will be more popular than the others. I mean, in this situation, like about at the mid-class hotels, like 3-star, 2-star, even 2.5. I mean, not like 4-star or between 3-star. So these hotels is going to be melted in the industry. This is our forecast. Thank you very much.
Tom Jenkins, what strategies must industry stakeholders use in order to attract travelers, particularly as the global economic slowdown continues and people don't have as much income that they can spend on travel?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that our analysis in the short term is that the people who've been most affected by the economic downturn are not the target market for European vacations. So we're quite confident that the demand and the ability, and the financial capacity to travel to Europe is there and remains robust. I think the short-term question really is how far the supply line within Europe is going to be able to meet demand. I'm not saying that demand is going to wildly outstrip supply at any time shortly, but the state of the service economy within Europe as it emerges from what is a coma is an interesting question. You know, what do the shops look like? What do the restaurants look like? What do the entire menu of what we offer incoming visitors look like? As to how people should react to this, I think really this is a fabulous moment for intermediaries. Intermediaries, tour operators, websites, wholesalers, they add most value when sales are most difficult to make. And at the moment, customers are very, very thin on the ground. And if you can, when your business is to find customers for suppliers, then you should be able to have a very, very good time indeed. So I think for the next 6 to 9 months, those entrepreneurs that can link customers who we know want to travel with suppliers who I know need customers, then they're in a very good position.
Tony Wheeler, I want to get back to a point that you made earlier about the restrictions that are in place, particularly, there in Australia, where the number of cases are low, but you still don't have free movement. It was a couple weeks ago at the G20 meeting where Chinese President Xi Jinping suggested a global QR code where it would track people's health status, as well as their travel. It's something that China's already using domestically. I know there's something similar in the UK, although probably not widely used. I know the European Union has some similar tracking methods. Here in Turkey, we have what's called a HES code. It's attached to a QR code. You have to have it to book a domestic flight, to check into hotels, and now just in the last day or two to even enter a mall, you have to show this HES code and QR code. I'm curious as to what you think people are willing to accept for life to return back to normal, or a version of normal, these quarantines and these big brother type tracking methods. And how much of this do you think will stick around long after the pandemic is over?
I think a lot of the changes we're going to experience are going to stick around for a long time. After 9/11, we got used to airport security being much tighter than it used to be. And, the idea of going in and not putting your bag through the X-ray machine and not being checked out and so on, is totally alien. And I think that'll be the same thing with travel post-pandemic. We're going to have to prove that we're healthy to travel. I know Qantas has said that they're not going to accept passengers unless they can prove that they've been vaccinated when a vaccine comes in. And there have been people saying, oh, if you won't, I don't want to have the vaccination, I won't travel with you. Okay, then don't travel. So I think we're going to have lots of restrictions that will become part of everyday life. I think there are a lot of things that we've been talking about, the fact that we can do so much more of our business meetings on the internet, and we're used to Zooming and meeting in that way. But then people don't need to be living in the places they were before. So I think there's going to be major upheavals. Why live in the middle of a city if you can live out in a village in the country somewhere and still meet just as if you were in the middle of a city? I think there's going to be lots of changes that we really haven't anticipated yet, and are going to be bigger changes than we thought were going to happen.
Lauren, I want to ask you about that as well. Tony mentioned the Qantas CEO saying that people who fly internationally on Qantas will be required to have taken a coronavirus vaccine. Do you think this digital health pass is the future of travel, not just during the pandemic, but beyond? Are these measures here to stay? And what about contact trace measures? I'm curious as to your thoughts on that as well.
Credentials or passes, certainly more than the track and trace. The digital credentials is something that's been on an upward trend with digital identity and being able to share information about or share proof of information about yourself without handing over your personal data. And the digital health credential is no different. Yes, it may be a QR code in format, if so, but it's a credential that says, I meet the requirements for this flight or entry into a country, or I don't. It's a green or red light, and I'm not passing as a traveler any of my information on. If that's the way that it develops, then I think it's on the same trend that has been happening with digital identity, with biometrics, with proving information about yourself do you have a visa to enter this country? The track and trace, I think, is a little bit you use the word big brother. I think people are concerned about that, and understandably so. And so I think importantly is any of these technologies need to be privacy preserving. And I think that they are here to stay. The international regulator has published specifications for new digital travel credentials. In other words, a digital passport that was underway before the pandemic hit, and development of these types of technologies and digital wallets and health wallets, I think is definitely here to stay.
Tom Jenkins, I'm curious as to about movement within European countries, because that's in the past it was fairly easy, particularly with the Schengen zone. Is it still possible to have free movement because with the pandemic and then in the post-pandemic world?
Well, I mean, in the pandemic, countries have reasserted their right to close borders and to close down zones within borders, even within countries. And we're looking at the UK, where I'm based. It's now very difficult to travel around even within the UK. I think in the post-pandemic world, I think one of the first things that the European Union is going to be really keen on doing is reasserting the Schengen area as a free travel zone. And I think this will be one of the first things that come into play. It's certainly very high on their priorities. I also feel that there is, as someone's already alluded, a huge pent-up demand for people to travel. It's extraordinary that sectors which, in theory, should be highly resistant to people coming on board during a coronavirus pandemic, like coach tourism, domestic coach tourism within Europe, takes off whenever they're allowed to take off. So there is a huge demand for even quite high proximity tourism within Europe, and we saw in August, when the borders came down to a certain extent, large volumes of people, not the sort of volumes we usually see, but significant volumes of people traveling from Northern Europe down to the Mediterranean for their annual summer holiday. So I think we will see a bounce back, certainly in terms of domestic and intra-European travel quite quickly. How fast long-haul international travel recovers is going to be a really open question. And that is going to be an area where the industry will have to try and respond. And it's going to be very interesting to see what that response is.
Yeah, interesting indeed. Tom Lowry, what have you seen and heard about fears and anxiety that people have about traveling, not because of the coronavirus, but because of the measures taken, this track and trace technology and privacy concerns that people might have?
Well, it's interesting. We, in terms of pent up demand, I mean, I think some of the expectations are a little overblown in that. And I think it all comes down to sort of traveler and consumer confidence. And I'll go back to something that Lauren was saying about digital health passes. I mean, I feel like, there's sort of a double-edged sword there in terms of the confidence of the traveler. I mean, will a lot of travelers be deterred by the fact that they have to share that information? Or will there be kind of renewed confidence knowing that the person you're sitting next to on an airplane or standing next to in a hotel lobby has had the same sort of health screenings that you have had? This sort of came to light for us at Skift. We had our first aviation forum 2 weeks ago. And I can say that there's sort of measured optimism among the airline executives, and that there's no expectation that even when there's a vaccine, that the vaccine will be this panacea and we'll see a return to sort of robust travel by the end of 2021. I mean, some airline executives were even saying, we don't expect to see things return to pre-pandemic levels until 2025. So again, I think that it comes down to a measure of how confident is consumers. And I think that consumer confidence comes from obviously national leadership on some of these issues, as well as sort of, how well the vaccine is distributed and how efficient that distribution is.
Right, and so I just want to ask a follow-up question, like as far as increasing that consumer confidence, because of course there are people who are concerned about their privacy and a lot of people who are concerned about the vaccine as well. If a vaccine, digital health pass is required, is this just a matter of those people don't get to travel if they don't do it, or we're just going to focus on the people who are willing to accept these new technological measures that are in place to keep us safe?
You're right. How you market the digital health pass to people as being sort of necessary to be able to travel. I saw a study over the summer that said that people that were nervous about traveling that finally got on a plane and traveled, 80% of those people said they would travel again. So it's just sort of like breaking through those initial fears. So I think a lot of this will be determined once we get the vaccine out and people feel comfortable with what they're seeing in terms of others traveling.
Bulut, Bağcı, Turkey reopened to tourism this summer and had a number of measures in place to ensure safe tourism. Talk to us about some of the measures that Turkey implemented to keep travelers safe and healthy while they were in the country, as well as how they handled outbreaks in tourism hotspots.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I want to add some small thing before me. So especially for the digital passports, what we observe, because I'm traveling a lot to Africa and Asia, what I observe, so a digital passport is applicable for some countries. It's done, no worries. But the thing is, how it will be proceed to the other part of the world. So how the practice will be. So it's more important because the people are traveling all around the world. So it's okay for Germany. I mean, it's okay for Berlin. It's okay Bogota. It's okay in Istanbul. But how this will be in practice in Jamina, or how this will be in practice in Cambodia. So this is the question mark that we are thinking also. So on your question, when you come back, Turkey achieved a good job. First of all, they created safe zones like Antalya. Antalya is the coastal area of the Turkey. I mean, the resource area of Turkey, and they prevent it from the. I mean, they create a safe zone, and then they give a huge education for the terrain for the staff, and also there were huge inspections from the Minister of Tourism. So with the protocol. So who follows the protocol? The hotels are open, and even if just one small problem came, and then it's already sorted. So Turkey managed very well. So, and also it's a good chance for Turkey because the whole tourists are coming from just one source. It means from Russia, Ukraine, CIS countries, and also small parts from Germany. So it's easy to manage. So if these things, if the source of the tourists can be maybe 10 or 15 different countries with a volume, it will be too hard to manage it. But the fortune of Turkey is because of the charter flights and because of the resort tourism, so it's easy to manage close one destination just for a touristic area and then manage it with the COVID protocol that the World Health Organization and UNWTO and all the other sector leaders are they described. So it's then the Minister of Tourism and the hotel associations and the tourism business partners, so they manage very well. So thank you.
Yeah, and I did quite a bit of traveling throughout Turkey this summer, and I have to say that it was managed really well. It almost felt like there was no pandemic, other than the fact that you were getting your temperatures checked and people were wearing masks. Federico González, I do want to piggyback on that and ask about what you see going forward with the hotel experience, because of course, checking into a hotel now, there are the temperature checks, biometric screenings. Do you see a digital health pass and a requirement for a vaccine being part of the future for hotel stays as well?
Well, I think if we keep some distance, the hotel at the end is only one small piece of the travel. Okay, it's the plane, it's the hotel, it's the restaurants, is where you go, is the shops. So I think possibly there will be nothing that is extremely different to the hotel to what is required to go to the destination. And actually, I think one of the key areas of focus needs to be actually every destination will, depending on what they do, they will get whatever the future they will have. I fully agree with what has been said about Turkey. I think the country did a phenomenal job in trying not only to do the right thing, but actually communicate to the right targets, okay, that what was being done, so people understood and they went there. So I think the destinations in the future are going to have to prove to the world that it's not only that the hotel is safe, but actually the destination on its own is well coordinated, is well managed, and we cannot forget that this crisis is a crisis of fear. So I personally believe that the moment the fear is gone, many people or most people will go into their normal habits. People is willing to travel. People is needing, actually, not only for tourism, but also for business to meet and to have discussions. I guess we all suffer from this kind of not sensing, okay, the feeling of the people when we meet via this kind of new technologies that we are all using. So I think at the end is the hotels, and I think that's good, by the way, for the hotels. I think all the hotels worldwide will have to increase, and most of them have done it already, increase the quality and the safety standards. And I think that's a good news. It will not only prevent COVID, but I think it will prevent many other diseases. And I think it's going to focus the consumer more on quality and less on price picking, no matter what happens with hygiene. And I think that's a good news for the world. It's not in hotels, but also in planes. I personally, okay, when I was traveling, okay, before the COVID, sometimes I wondered if they had really time to clean the plane, because it was like 10, 15 minutes in between people exiting and myself going into the plane. And you know what? I would have paid even a bit more for that, or for feeling that actually there was enough time to clean the plane. So, and I think that is one of the big benefits, I think, of this crisis. The level of quality and the level of safety that all over the world, and in hotels in particular, all the protocols we have put in place, the protocol of the World Travel and Tourism Council, the ones that Radisson has done, or many other chains, that are going to benefit not only to avoid COVID, but actually to make the health and the safety standards in the hotels much better. And I think the consumers will look at that and will see it.
Yeah, I think certainly no one is upset about safety standards such as cleanliness being part of everyday life. I do want to ask you another question. I was traveling recently in Turkey, and I had booked a room at a hotel, and I got an email a few hours later saying that I could check in with my mobile phone and could use my mobile phone as a key, so I wouldn't even have to interact with a person when I went to the hotel to check in. How are mobile phones becoming key components in delivering a safe, contactless experience? And what I'm also curious about is, how does it affect people whose jobs would normally be that person who would check you in? I mean, doesn't this mean that some people will be losing jobs?
Well, I think no. I mean, the first to the second point, I don't think people will lose jobs, but possibly the nature of the jobs will change. Okay, I think one of the things we are seeing in the hotels is we are asking people to be a bit more flexible. And because different needs in the hotels may happen at different times of the day. So you may be in the reception, you may have to be in a restaurant, you may have to be in another division. So I think that will change and there will be more flexibility. Now, to your point, I think we, in the hotel industry, what is going to happen is that there is going to be, and I think everybody's working to get that, is a much higher level of personalization and a much higher level of bringing different solutions to different people. To your point, I think we are all advancing to have a contactless experience for those consumers who want it. But I can tell you, even today, we have many consumers who still want the contact, still want to get the human welcoming, the human information. And I personally, I always prefer the consumers to have a human contact, because I think this is what makes us as a company different to other companies, where you could be checking in. It doesn't matter if it's a human being or a machine, it's the same treatment. I personally believe that in the spirit of service, the experience should be different when you are welcomed by a person who worries or is able to adapt their behavior to your wishes than if you do it through a machine. But that said, I think the mobile technology is there to stay. Everything will be seamless. And I wish not only the hotel, but actually the travel worldwide would be seamless, so I don't have to show so many papers to so many people in so many different instances when I travel. So I think that seamless, a hotel stay or check-in, check-out is going to happen. And I think many consumers will welcome that. But I have to say that many other consumers still will welcome the human touch, the human welcoming, making the right questions, and trying to get contact with the person. But as I said, I think the critical point is going to be, there is no longer one solution in a hotel. We are working to make sure that not only in welcoming, but even in food, there has been a moment where everything has been individually packed. Well, there are consumers who are asking back to, hey, I want to steal my buffet, in the hotel. Now, deliver it to me in a way that I feel safe. So I think individualization, tailor-made solutions, and an increased complexity in the execution of the solutions for the hotels is going to be there, and is going to be the key for the future.
Yeah, I know I personally still like to meet face-to-face with someone when I check in, because I like to ask questions, but it is certainly nice to have the option of a contactless check-in if it is there. But I think you're right that it is the future. Julián, Orozco, I know the country's Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Tourism launched a biosafety certification for the tourism sector that allows tourism service providers to demonstrate compliance with mandatory protocols issued by the national government and their efforts to comply with COVID-19 pandemic health standards. Can you talk to us about what some of those measures are?
Yes, thank you. As other countries did, we adopted biosafety protocols that were compulsory for all the tourism sector to adopt in different fields like restaurants and hotels and the aviation industry, etc. But we thought it would be useful to complement that with a voluntary stamp we call the Checkin Certified. And we followed a route that was a little bit different from what other countries follow. This was not a certification or a stamp developed or given by either the Ministry of Tourism or the private sector itself, the different associations of the sector similar to what several other countries did. We followed a different path, and what we did is that we used the conformity evaluation organisms, such as Bureau Veritas, SGS, in the case of Colombia, Econtech. But these types of organizations, because we thought that it was better to give enough trust to the stamp, in the sense that it was a third-party independent government with the credentials and the experience to do this type of assessment, to make sure that the protocols adopted by the government were being put in place in the correct manner. And it proved to be a quite good road or path that we used. Actually, there are approximately 2,000 companies that have adopted the Checkin Certified stamp, and that includes the larger, or pretty much all the airlines in Colombia, the airports, many hotel chains in Colombia as well, restaurants. It has even been expanded to include not only the tourism sector, as a result of the good experience that we've had with the stamp, but also shopping, different shops and commercial centers have also adopted this Checkin Certified, and we're really happy, and I think it has been a good reference for the region as well. But we needed to complement that with a standard or a mutual recognition between different countries, so that we'd not only incentivize domestic travel, but only international travel. And we have been leading an effort in the framework of the OAS to make sure that countries have a similar type of standard. It has proven to be quite difficult, but we have been working hard in trying to make some progress in that regard. At the end of the day, the seal aims at building trust, and as somebody mentioned it before, but the key word for the recovery phase is trust. We need to build trust, and every single decision that we made as government or as private sector has to contribute to building that trust that we need to incentivize demand.
Right. So I want to piggyback on that and ask, as far as the building trust from tourists, are you seeing a resurgence in tourism there in Colombia? Because I know that it is a very important part of the sector, the economy there.
Yes, fortunately, we are still seeing a rebound, and we are seeing that tourism is starting to be reactivated, and we have several decisions in place. We had strengthening the budget for promotion, for marketing. We have an international campaign. For the moment, we are focusing more on the domestic campaign, but we have seen travel increase, and there is a recognition by IATA, mainly in the region, that Colombia has been one of the countries that has been able to reactivate more speedily, of course, not to the extent that we would want, but more speedily travel domestically. So, yeah, we're seeing a good trend, but we need to emphasize every minute that this is not the time to relax the biosafety measures, but to the contrary, we need to have more auto control, auto protection, etc., to make sure that we don't have the need to go back to further measures that limit the mobility of people.
Tony Wheeler, I'm curious about the role that you see Lonely Planet playing in the future of travel post-pandemic, because I, like a lot of people, have traveled with a Lonely Planet tucked under my arm when I'm traveling. I mean, as far as developing a more sustainable model for travel and tourism, how can Lonely Planet partake in that?
Look, I'm no longer part of Lonely Planet, so I'm only guessing what they might do. But I think it's going to be very difficult for a while to know what's happening. It's hard to write about places if you don't know if they're going to be reopening, if they're going to be back in action by the time your new edition of the guidebook, whatever, comes out. But I think we are going to see a lot more of local tourism. We've spoken about that, about how people want to drive places rather than fly there. I think there's going to be a lot more interest in, for example, walking tourism. The last time I was in Colombia, I did the walk up to Ciudad Perdida, the lost city. Now that's the sort of local tourism where you're not having to worry about interacting with large crowds. You're off by yourself on the walking trails. I've been talking to friends of mine in Europe of when I can get back to Europe, what I'd like to do. And one of the things I've never done in Spain is I've never walked the Camino Santiago, the famous pilgrim walk there. And that's something I'd really like to do next time I get back there. And again, that's something that you're doing by yourself, that you've got a little isolation there. Friends in Italy, there's a new walk developed between the town of Ravenna on the Adriatic coast, a week or so walking up to Florence, to Firenze, Dante Walk it's called. And I think that's another example of this sort of local tourism that we hope will develop. But I'm really, one of the things that's concerned me during this whole pandemic is regions of the world which may not necessarily have been hit so badly by the pandemic. And I think Africa is a case of this, that the pandemic has really not, apart from in South Africa, and even South Africa has recovered to a large degree, has not been hit as badly as South America or Europe or the Americas, but the tourists have stopped going there. And, it's had a huge impact economically. And I'm really hoping that, we will see some bounce back when people can start to travel again. They will look at places which, need tourists coming in. They need to have that economic activity that tourism brings. And I hope that does return very soon.
Yeah, you talk about local tourism, people staying closer to home, doing more road trips. What are some things that countries can do to entice people to do more domestic traveling? Because, of course, international travel sounds more glamorous. But, as far as countries getting people to rediscover where they're from.
Look, one of the things I've been doing, I've been talking with people in New Zealand. And just before the pandemic hit, New Zealand was another place that was worrying about over-tourism. And over-tourism, we see it in lots of different ways. We see the situation in Barcelona or in Venice, where the local population is almost overwhelmed by the number of tourists. And in New Zealand, the situation was a lot of tourism in New Zealand is based on walking activity, the walking trails, the outdoors, the nature. And people were really concerned that they were losing that isolation, that feeling of freedom, by the fact that there were simply too many tourists. And there's been discussion in New Zealand that New Zealand really has been cut off, like Australia. It's fine to have no coronavirus, but if you also have no visitors, that side of the picture isn't so good. And in New Zealand, they are saying, well, when we restart, we really have to look at this in a different respect. We can't just go back to the way things were before. If we were worried about there being too many tourists on the walking trails, just like people in Barcelona might be worried about too many tourists on Las Ramblas. Is there some way we can approach this in a better way after the pandemic?
Yeah, I remember over-tourism was always such a concern. All right, Federico González, the COVID-19 pandemic has arguably acted as an accelerator for this ongoing digital transformation of both business and society. What does this mean for the hospitality industry as it relates to business travel in particular, and the potential for companies to increasingly move meetings and conferences to digital platforms rather than booking space at a hotel?
Yes, I think actually what how we see the future is, as you are saying, is that there's an acceleration of technology implementation, and actually we were working before COVID, okay, and actually that's why we introduced them already last month. Okay, we have introduced something we call hybrid solutions, it's hybrid rooms or hybrid meetings, and I think it's a combination. I think we are going all to see first people is going to come back to meetings, I think, and corporate meetings as they did before. But I think this level of easiness in connectivity has enabled us to think on solutions that we didn't think of before. You may go to a hotel because you're having a meeting with your sales force in Istanbul, okay? And at the same time, okay, you may want to connect with another meeting that is happening in Ankara, okay? And at that moment, you may want to give a message to the two organizations at the same time. And then I think in the hotel industry, and what we have introduced as hybrid meetings, I would have the possibility to, meanwhile I'm in the hotel in Istanbul, to get a very instant connection, okay, thanks to the new equipments that are available that we are installing, that it would allow me to give the speech not only to the people who is present at that moment in Istanbul, but actually also do it in Ankara. And I think those kind of hybrid solutions are going to increase. I think also whenever you go to rooms, we are equipping, we are putting equipments in rooms where you could use the room also as an office. So many of us may have gone to a hotel room where, for whatever reason, we only think about sleeping in the room, okay, and during the day the room is empty or we are not using it. I think in all those rooms or larger rooms, junior suites, we are putting the right equipment, so you could use during the whole day the room as an office to have your video conference if you need. You may go later on to an event and then come back to the room or to the room office. So I think those kind of solutions are going to be there. I think also technology in service apartments, that I think is a segment that is going to keep growing, okay, in the coming years, is going to be there. And I think those solutions, why, and one question is why are we going to implement them now? Why we are implementing them in hotels now is because I think one of the effects of this crisis is last minute booking, or many times these kind of ideas may come in the last minute. So I think those equipments will have to be there, and you will not be able to wait, okay, or you will not be willing to wait 1 week till you have the setup of the equipment to have your contact. Many of those things may come as you are doing the event, and I think hotels will adapt and will start implementing those solutions across the globe. We have it now in 50 hotels. We're implementing that right now in 50 hotels, and our plan is to have it in all the chain, in the right business hotels by the end of 2021. And I think that will continue, and that will be all over the industry to help. I don't think that will kill many meetings or replace many meetings, but I think it will make many of the meetings to have a larger reach in terms of how many people you can talk or you can interact with.
Tom Lowry, we heard from Tony Wheeler talk about tourism moving more toward domestic tourism and smaller groups and people staying closer to home. Do you see that a rise of localization in other sectors of travel, particularly as it relates to consumption and production patterns?
Well, I'm glad Tony brought up over tourism, because that's certainly something that we've written quite a bit about over the past few years. And I mean, we're asking ourselves questions now about whether under tourism is going to be the new over tourism. And it was great to hear about sort of, you know, these trips to remote areas. I mean, in the last several months, we've launched a series here at Skift called Second City Survival Diaries, where we're looking at what sort of second tier cities, not the sort of Parises, Londons, and New Yorks, are doing in terms of facing the challenges of the pandemic. And a lot of those stories focus on the small business owners and really doing inspiring and innovative things. I mean, the first two that we've done were in Jacksonville, Florida, and the other one was in Durban in South Africa. So I think there's real efforts to try to promote local tourism, and I think there's a real opportunity. I mean, I know colleagues that I work with at Skift here in New York who have done last minute bookings because they've got so much cabin fever. They've gone out to the TWA hotel at JFK and spent the weekend out there with their kids. So I think there's real opportunities for that kind of sort of localism.
Lauren Uppink, Calderwood, I want to get back to how technology can get us back to a normal version of what we used to know with travel, because of course traveling by airplane was one of the main causes of how the coronavirus spread around the world. It certainly got a bad rap for that. And many people I know are afraid to get back on airplanes. Talk to us about how technology has improved the flight experience and made it actually safer to travel, and how just getting on board is a much safer health experience now because of the pandemic?
Well, I mean, aviation and traveling by plane is one of the safest ways to travel, and has always been, because of the safety accreditation and certification rules that are in place globally. Actually, the study that came out by many of the manufacturers that showed that actually it was a very low risk of transmission of COVID in aircraft is not due to any, increased or new procedures around their air filtering systems, etc., but actually through their existing system. However, of course, in travel, the assumption is that you will be around crowds of people, and so you do need to take extra measures to improve, to ensure that risk of transmission is low. I think that an important thing to remember is while technology is an enabler of many things, it's not the only thing that has to be unlocked for travel to reopen and for people to feel safe. And one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing, and it's been touched on by some of these speakers, is that travelers are less fearful now, but actually more frustrated. And the reason that many surveyed travelers are not traveling, especially internationally, is because they're worried about being quarantined unexpectedly or not being able to, or getting trapped somewhere. In fact, just yesterday, my father-in-law was unable to catch his flight because of a change in the testing requirements for the country he was traveling to. So we're experiencing that firsthand, all of us, the confusion and the frustration. And actually to unlock that is not as much always a technology question. In fact, when we speak about the technology that's being developed for health credentials, a key piece to that is a global registry of accredited health labs and a global registry of the entry requirements in an interoperable format, so that when a traveler is looking to go somewhere, that they're able to access what those entry requirements are in a very easily understandable way. And so, yes, technology can enable that, but that requires an enormous amount of global coordination, of public-private interaction and cohesion, so that private sector, industry, and governments are all speaking the same language and able to provide that seamless, the seamless experience for a traveler. And technology can enable that, but it can't be solved just by technology alone.
Right. So how important is it to have a standardized system around the world? And is that even possible? Because on one hand, we have the Qantas CEO saying, yes, you will have to have a vaccine before you fly on our airplanes. And some countries require having a coronavirus test before you enter. Some countries require a quarantine period. Some countries don't require anything. And so people are just, I think, really confused more than anything about what are the standards? What do you have to do? Do I have to get a vaccine? Do I have to get a test? Do I have to quarantine? How important, and again, is it even possible to have a standardized system in place?
I think you raise a good point. I would maybe use harmonized rather than standardized. So you're never going to have a situation, especially with sovereign states, that there will be exactly the same rules for entry. That doesn't exist today with border entry and visa requirements, and that won't exist for health passes and credentials. However, what works with the passport is that it's a harmonized system, that there are standards for what a passport needs to look like, what a visa needs to look like, how they are used. And then government and industry can make their decisions on their level of risk acceptance accordingly and make the rules of entry. What needs to be the part that needs to be standardized is the way in which people can access that information, in the way that they can share their information and understand the system. So I think I'm using standards again, but harmonization of that process rather than the exact same process in every single country or industry experience.
Tom Jenkins, how might the lack of internationally agreed upon standards and measures to deal with future health crises impact the ability of the travel and tourism industry to offer a consistent product to consumers?
Well, I mean, we don't offer a consistent product to consumers. That's part of the virtue of it. Sorry to retort quite like that, but the great virtue of tourism is its variety. I think reassurance is going to be important. It's going to be vital. But I think, as people have mentioned before, that with a vaccine, I think that reassurance will exist. And I think we are trying to plan for the last crisis out of place here. I think what we shouldn't be doing is fighting our last battle. We need to initially to try and reassert confidence and get things going again. Now, whether that's through new products that pander to people's fears, or whether it's old products that answer and address people's desires, it's really it's an open field in terms of discussion. But I think that we need to have a consistent line on this. I don't think it's ultra necessary. One thing's for certain is it's not unusual to have a vaccine before traveling. Any of us who go to equatorial regions know that you really have to have a vaccine before you travel. And this is not unusual at all. So I think this will be part of the new normal, I can see. But beyond that, I can't see a major change either in travel patterns or people's desires.
Yeah, a good point to bring up about the vaccines, because I remember when I moved to China, I got maybe 5 or 6 rounds of vaccines before I moved there. And I think that's something that people forget when it comes to this coronavirus vaccine, especially because there's been so much publicity around it. Bulut, Bağcı, I want to turn to you again, because, you know, tourism is about more than just people going on tropical vacations or not being able to go on tropical vacations this year. It does affect a lot of people's jobs. What kind of financial and political support is needed for the tourism recovery industry?
Again, first of all, tourism is not you cannot think about tourism like a foreign exchange, or you cannot think about tourism like a job creation. Tourism is all together. Tourism means experience. Tourism means feel. Tourism means socialization. So, for example, I want to give just one example. Last week, we organized Global Tourism Forum event in Istanbul. For the attend of the program in Istanbul, we received more than 1,000 people physically who wants to attend. So, if you want to get the information, it's easy to access right now with this technology. You can Google or you can do YouTube and get all information about the destination. But the tourism is like a feeling, like an experience. So we have to think just this. After that, as previously I said, the government, the major role of this coronavirus pandemic on the effects on tourism is directly related with the governments. Because like the Radisson said 2 minutes ago, so they are managing very well. All the hotel groups, all the private sector is managing very well the tourism, that the protocols. But the thing is, the most important thing is these protocols have to be, for example, if I am injected or if I get the
All right, looks like we've lost our connection with Bulut, Bağcı, so I want to...
In their mind. Yeah, we have to clear the mind of this complication that some countries are creating in the tourist mind. So tourists are ready to fly, tourists are ready to eat, tourists are ready to shop. So this is the thing that I see. And on your question, what I see, of course, we get lots of loss on the decrease on the job creation during this pandemic. So because the employees of the tourism sector is, you can separate two. One is the full-time, the other is the part-time. So all these part-time employees, staff is fired or they get the vacation, etc., etc. So the government did some subsidies for them, give half payments of their salaries, etc. But the most important thing is this cannot be continue like this. So the governments, first of all, have to focus how they can organize these standards of the airport when a tourist is coming a country, because Radisson is ready to host the tourists, or Marriott is ready to host the tourists, or even a taxi driver is ready to host the tourists. But the thing is, all the tourists are not like all the infected the coronavirus, so the peoples are ready to travel. So this is my comments. Thank you very much.
Julián, Orozco, You know, when the pandemic is over, how do you see tourism, not just in Colombia, but in Latin America and worldwide, adapting to the needs and challenges that have arisen because of the pandemic? You know, one that's more responsible with the environment.
Well, I think that Latin America and Colombia, I have to say in particular, is well positioned for what we would call the post-pandemic type of tourism. I think several of you have mentioned that there will be increased interest in travel that supposes a less level of contact among a high number of people. And that relates to issues like nature travel. It was mentioned walking in the Santiago, in Camino de Santiago, in the Lost City, adventure travel, nature travel, those type of activities that again suppose a less contact with a high number of people. So I think that the region in general, Latin America, is well positioned to attract those type of tourism. Colombia, in particular, is a country, a relatively large country, 1 million square kilometers. It's the size of Spain, France, and Portugal together, with a variety of ecosystems and different landscapes. But as you mentioned, one of the key elements of the future tourism will be sustainability. I think that there is a higher degree of conscience by consumers that we need to better protect the planet. And I think that will be maybe not the only, but a quite important decision-making criteria for future travelers. And we need to enhance that discussion that is being made in different forums like the World Economic Forum, at the UN, WTO, WTTC, but we need to make sure that we put the right measures in place. We're actually publishing in a week's time the first sustainable tourism policy of Colombia, and we have really looked into detail into the best practices, both of countries of the OECD, but also worldwide, and we really have to hope to have in place one of the best sustainable tourism policies that there exist. And we are discussing there issues related to climate change, the use of non-conventional and renewable energy resources, the administration of the water resource that is scarce in different places, and it's one of the challenges the world faces in the future. We're talking about the disposing of solid residues, of liquid residues, and finally the protection and conservation of our biodiversity of flora and fauna. So I think that this will become an increasingly important issue that countries need to address. And sustainability is no longer philanthropy, it's no longer responsibility for future generations, it's no longer love for nature. Of course, those are the issues that should inspire us to be sustainable, but sustainability has become a crucial aspect of the competitiveness of different destinations. And I'm sure that the ones that invest in sustainability are better positioned to attract travelers from around the world.
Federico González, how can the sector ensure it is more resilient to crises in the future?
Depends on two things. One is the work we do ourselves. Okay, how do we build more flexibility, and how do we become more agile? Okay, to reacting to the different situations. I mean, I think the sector has been used for many years to be, if not fully occupied, nearly fully occupied. So now I think we need to build more flexibility in the economics, be more agile to change. And I think we have learned how to do it painfully, okay, during this crisis. I think part of that knowledge on flexibility, how to adapt, will stay. But I think, however, the future of the sector also depends on the work that the institutions at global level do. I think it has been mentioned before, if this crisis has shown something, and when we talk about sustainability, I think if we want to make the solution sustainable, we need the right global, regional, or whoever authority to talk with authority. if you think, for example, the work that the WTTC organization has done with the standards of safety, I think has been fantastic. They have come with a lot of clarity saying, these are the protocols we have checked, validated, and we advise these protocols to happen. And even the smallest hotel of the world, if they want, they can go to the WTTC web, they can check the protocol. If they fulfill it, they will get the stamp. I think one of the still big questions on how sustainable the recovery will be is if we are able to get any organization to speak with clarity and with scientific support about the solutions. Because imagine that we get the vaccine, and 1 month into the vaccine, and once people feel there is no fear, news start to come of any kind. And then different regions take different measures. This is what is creating a huge confusion in the consumers. I mean, I'm today, for example, in Paris. The situation in Paris of what is open and closed is different to what is in London. It's completely different to what it was in Brussels, where I was last week. And it's absolutely different to what it is in Madrid. But the worst is not that, is that Madrid actually is different to Valencia or is different to Barcelona. So one of the things that I think is happening to the operators or to any economic operator and to the consumers is, who on earth is taking which decisions based on what? And I think we as an industry, we need to try to get someone who would take one orientation that would make us consumers or business people really have and believe that whatever decisions have some base. Because even with all the respect for the aviation, I read that I was safe to travel in a plane and that I would not contaminate it in a plane. That's why I keep traveling, by the way. And then suddenly one airline says, well, if you don't get a vaccine, you will not get into my plane. So I wonder, hey, does he know something that the others do not know? Okay, it's the same question when I travel from one country to the other one. So I think, looking to the future, I think the hotel industry will do, and I think all the hotels, and I think more individual hotels will come to change to ask for support in operations and in safety and in protocols. But I think unless one authority, takes this seriously and start sending or proposing worldwide protocols or regional protocols, I'm not asking even for EEC protocols, because I think the EEC has shown that they have no ability to come this time with a protocol that everybody will impose. But I think if we don't clarify this mess, vaccine will not solve the issue. After the vaccine, whatever, something will happen, a country will take whatever decisions, and the consumer will be confused. So I think the global institutions or the regional institutions should take this more serious and agree to protocols or to measures that are science-based or judgment-based, but at least with transparency, so the consumer can take the decisions, or the hotel companies can take decisions to invest. And I want to use the example of Turkey. We are very confident with, for example, all the measures and the approach that Turkey had this year. That's why, for example, in our 5-year plan, we have reinforced our bet in Turkey, and we want to grow even more than we have today. And I think more operators will do the same with those countries and destinations that take this seriously, shares concrete measures, and communicate those measures in the proper way to the key stakeholders.
All right, and we are going to leave it there because we are completely out of time. I do want to thank my guests today, Julián Guerrero Orozco, Federico González, Tom Jenkins, Lauren Uppink, Calderwood, Tony Wheeler, Tom Lowry, and Bulut Bağcı. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today on this discussion. And with that, I will conclude this panel and hand it over to TRT World's host,